start with, I've tried to do this slide so many times, and I made it really complicated, and in the end, I just thought, you know what, I'm going to use some clip art. So this is basically what's happening in this market, okay? It is undoubtedly going right up. Interest, the fundamentals, everything has changed over recent years. So off the back of that, what we're seeing is people like the European Union, the high-level expert group, then coming across to UK governments, working on sustainable finance, green finance initiative, Corley report looking at impact investment, loads of activities happening there. But what they focus on and what people often forget is that people do a deep dive into one area because they love it and it's what they do. But what a lot of people forget is that really we're talking about a really wide market with lots of different strategies. I'm pretty welcoming of pretty much any strategy in this area, so long as it's clearly different from a normal investment where you pay no attention to ESG stuff. So long as people are integrating it, bringing it in and doing something sensible that is helpful, constructive for the planet and meeting clients' needs, then I am happy. And I think there are really two main axes that we can look at. So this was kind of a randomly done thing, but basically on the y-axis, I've put being aware of ESG issues when it comes to stock selection. So it's where do you invest, where don't you invest? So the stock selection decision-making process will be different for funds and portfolios in this area. And on the x-axis, what I've put is the ESG responsible ownership strategy. Now, people from different fund managers in this room and out there in the market, some specialise in one, some specialise in the other, but both are important. Now, I don't mind if every fund manager does all of them. They don't need to, but we've got to have people doing both, which is why I'm welcoming of all the managers in the area. So on the bottom axis, what we've got is responsible ownership, which is about what you do with the companies when you hold them. Okay, so dialogue with companies, engaging, having conversations about climate change, pushing companies to pay a lot more attention to this kind of thing and making sure that they do what they say they're going to do, they vote the way they say they're going to vote, and that they're consistent and open, honest, and really importantly, transparent about what they do. No point hiding this stuff away. It does not support trust. If there's any area in our sector that has got to be right up there with developing and delivering on the trust side, which we're so lacking in, it's got to be this sector. So that's partly why Fund EcoMarket came about, which is giving a home to all that information that people kind of are happy to put in the public domain, but it kind of gets lost on your own site, so I've brought it all together. And on the right-hand side on the slide here, I've just tried to plot some of the main terms and issues that people look at. So we started off back in 1984. The fund that I was probably best known as being associated with was the Friends Provident Stewardship range of funds. Now, that was very much ethical funds, but at the time as well, environmental and social issues were always there. So ethical, values-based stuff merged with environmental and social stuff, because let's face it, they're pretty much the same thing a lot of the time, because how are you looking after somebody if you're not looking after the environment that they live in? So these areas very much blend together. So we've got, started off with ethical, then environmental, clean technology. Sustainability became a big issue around about the mid-90s. Responsible ownership, so that's the share ownership stuff. That was the July 2000 amendment to the 95 Pensions Act. So around about 2000, that all kicked off. And then, of course, we've seen climate risk. But over the last couple of years, climate risk obviously has become massively important over the last 3 years. But then the whole sustainable finance area is what government's really getting behind at the moment, as Maria will touch on. And then ESG. ESG has gone from being something that was seen as a bit odd that some people looked at to almost a hygiene factor. People have got to start bringing in environmental, social and governance issues into their regular research and analysis. Otherwise, they're going to miss big risks and also big opportunities. So ESG has changed massively. Then there's impact. The impact area, of course, started off as being quite a narrow area where we were looking at directing capital towards maybe projects and small issues. And in recent years, that's really become an area where we're saying, no, let's measure and look at the way all investors can have an impact. So you're starting to see these funds who've said, we've been doing impact for 20 years, but they've not previously measured it, starting to measure it. Now, I wonder how far that will go. I think that's somewhat open to debate, because I do see that potentially being open to abuse. But those guys who are flagging on my website and are talking very, very actively about how they're having a positive impact, they're the leaders. They're the guys that are really focusing on this and are trying to make the world a better place and recognising the business benefits of doing so as well. And then recently, perhaps a swing in the opposite direction, we've seen a couple of funds being launched over the last year or so where they're talking about tilts, which is, for example, saying rather than having 6% in BP, you've got 2% in BP, so tilting away from the oil companies. That will suit some of your clients. It won't suit others of them. It's still a step in the right direction. It clearly won't suit everybody, but that is a trend that you should be aware of. It's what's happening at the moment. So what are we talking about issue-wise? We've talked about all these wide and narrow definitions and different issues, but at the end of the day, we're talking about people and we're talking about their environment. Now, I couldn't help putting this slide in. I spent ages playing with it. These are my holiday snaps. I went to Tanzania this summer, and the poverty there is heartbreaking. And even my teenage children were deeply moved by a lot of it. These kids in this school, we were just in a taxi, and I said, can we just stop and talk to these guys? And the taxi driver looked at me like I was barking mad. And as we pulled in, I chickened out. And it was my husband saying, no, Julia, you said you wanted to. Go in. And just meet them and realising loads of kids who were so happy and lovely, but no shoes, no nothing, all really skinny, really up against it. And this is the village that they were living in, top right. The one thing that jumps out and screams at me from that picture is the road is wet. It was the middle of the dry season. It shouldn't be wet in the middle of the dry season. This is what we're doing to our planet, to the climate. How's it going to affect these kids' futures? Excuse me. And bottom right is obviously lots of talk about slavery in that area, because that's where it came from. Actually, in that area, they see Britain as being a really positive influence because it was the UK that really helped them to abolish slavery in that part of Africa. But these are the kind of issues we're looking at. And then building on top of that, we've got the blue planet effect. Everyone's talking about plastics now. Thank goodness. I was talking about this 20, 25 years ago. Mark was probably talking about it 30, 35 years ago. I'm guessing he's probably talking about it at school. But I wasn't that switched on. But the numbers that we're seeing and just knowing that, the way it's affecting wildlife and how that will affect fish stocks, and it's getting into the food chain. However you look at this, stuff like plastics has got to be addressed. And I wrote an article for, I think, one of the people here's websites during the summer. The numbers of fund managers that are getting behind this as well now, fantastic. Fund managers saying, right, we're going to do something on this. We're going to talk to companies. We're going to try and push down the levels of plastics in the food chain. I'm going to click the wrong button soon. This keeps very nearly happening. And then, of course, I started off with a load of photos, but I've cut it down to this one because it's hard-hitting. Reason it's so important, it's the Economist, for goodness sake. This is mainstream stuff that your clients, intelligent, wealthy people, I must be the anomaly. I've always read The Economist, but, mainstream, regular people who are understanding that we are in big trouble on climate. And when this makes the front page of The Economist, that, stuff is seriously changing and things have got to be done. So in terms of what is being done on this, the answer is a lot. It's 20 years later than it should have been, but at least stuff is happening. What we saw last year was the Institute of Actuaries putting out a warning risk, basically saying all actuaries were to take into account climate risk when they were looking at their pension funds and other investments, and if they didn't, they'd be in breach of what their organisation is telling them to do, which is, of course, the insurance risk for them, etc., etc. So if the Institute of Actuaries has put out, and in fact, if you look it up, it's brilliant information. It goes through the whole sustainability agenda, explains things beautifully. DWP, Department of Work and Pensions, a few of us in this room have been talking to them quite a lot. They have changed the rules for pension schemes. Pensions will now pretty much always have to look at ESG stuff. And climate change is now inserted firmly as a word in the middle of the Statement of Investment Principles. I was pushing very hard for that. And thank you to those fund managers that came along with me to sort of make me look like I had a bit more gravitas when I talked to the DWP about a year ago to say, no, we want climate change in the middle of this. Some people disagreed. I think it's really important. If you haven't got much time to worry about this kind of thing because pure numbers is so much more important, then if you can only look at one thing, you jolly well look at climate change because that's what's going to hit the values of your pension fund apart from anything else. And, of course, the minor issue of affecting the world that we live in as well. DCMS. You've had the Corley report into growing environmental social impact. BEIS are looking at green finance. The FCA are looking at doing a review on this kind of thing. FCA are talking quite a lot about this now. You've got the issues around labels and taxonomies that have come through from Europe, but also extending. We're getting the Investment Association and others also looking at this area. Obligatory fact-finding looks like it may well come in for financial advisors. I think they've got to be careful as to how they deal with it, but there you go. Growing interest across the market. But still, the figures put out by IRIS last week this market, the individual ethical and sustainable fund market, still looks like it's at 19 billion. Now, I don't know how they crunch those figures. It may be, my feeling is it's probably more than that. But either way, we're still talking about only a small amount of money. Now, I'm going to just flick through a couple of things here because I'm being told I'm running low on time. But that was always going to happen. There are tools available. You've got the Sustainable Development Goals, which if you're not aware of them, please look them up and have a look. Fund managers are increasingly mapping those to the way funds work. So people are starting to draw parallels and understand how it fits that agenda. And importantly, in the bottom right here, last week, 26th, the PRA, so the regulatory arm of the Bank of England, put out a big statement to banks, basically telling them they've got to pay a lot more attention to climate risk. Interestingly, they had responses from 70% of their members, 10% of them, most of them said they recognise climate change as a risk. Only 10% of them are actually managing that risk. And 30% of them said they had it being looked after by their CSR departments. Oh dear, we have a long way to go. I'm going to give you a couple of slides just running through Fund EcoMarket now. So Fund EcoMarket is the tool I've spent the last 7 or 8 years developing. It really came out of a lot of the work I was doing with UCSIF around about 2006, 7, 8. So there are some IFAs, fund managers here who will have been aware of that, just saying we need to bring this information together. So free to use, whole of market, but only focused on the ethical side, on the SRI side, the issues. What I've done is I've split all the markets that exist, all the funds into 8 categories. 3 that are more values-based, so that's your pure faith-based funds. Ethical funds are split into 2 groups. So there are those that really focus on negative, exclusion and avoidance, and there are others that take more pragmatic approaches and normally would have engagement strategies, responsible ownership strategies next to that, so I treat those separately. Then you've got your thematic funds, social themed, environmental themed and sustainability, which is a combination, and then you've got ESG Plus, which is an area which is looking at the fact that some funds do focus primarily on ESG, but on top of that they do other work like screening, like engagement, and they've really built up from an ESG base. And then responsible ownership is looking at the way companies are dealt with once they're in a portfolio. To give you some idea of numbers, there's 107 primary funds on Fund EcoMarket, 97 of those are OICs. The ones that aren't OICs, the ones that are CCAVs, are kind of there by invitation only, because they're funds that I think really add something, because the tool is regulated retail onshore whole of market. So I don't really look to cover the CCAV market. I don't know that market well enough. But those funds I do know that I'm comfortable with, I will invite to come on here. Now, on your chairs, you will see that there's my Fund EcoMarket brochure, which I've just rewritten. It gives you a suggested advice process using Fund EcoMarket. So for the advisors in the room or for the fund management people in the room, just talk people through these kind of step-by-step processes. You start off with an open question, are you interested? And then you explore a bit more and then gradually take it into how you record all your findings, which Fund EcoMarket lets you do. And then you start to integrate that into the other information you've gathered on your client fact find. What does Fund EcoMarket look like? Well, this is the top and tail of the site. So this shows you've got a fact-find questionnaire on there as well, lots of fact-finding support. And this shows you can search by fund, or you can click on the sponsoring fund manager logos. There's a number of fund managers who support me in this, and what can I say? Thank you very much, because I feel this is so important, and every single one of those guys are helping me to do what I do. Absolute stars, so thank you. And some of these guys aren't here today because they had clashing events and that kind of thing, but most of those are here today. Filter options. So this is the stuff that other people don't cover, okay? There are a couple of people who, like ethical screening, like Iris, who do gather lots of information on this, but by and large, the data providers that IFAs are using, by and large, either don't cover this stuff or they don't go into a lot of detail. So these are your options. The top 3 are the real SRI ethically stuff. The first is, what are the issues you look at? What are the things you're looking at? The next one is around, well, how do they treat it? Are they just doing a bit of a tilt? Or are they doing really strict screening? How far are they going? And then on the right-hand side, you've got the corporate activity. This is more about the company, what sits behind the fund, who are the people, who are they working with, who are they connecting with, who are they partnering with to engage with clients to encourage investee companies to do things differently. Now, I'm very glad to say that yesterday a new section of my website went live, because I'd already done these slides, and it wasn't live until lunchtime yesterday. But basically what I've done to make those 3 boxes I went through earlier easier is to split them into groups. so that you can more easily see what you're looking at. And it doesn't quite work, but you've got the header at the top. It's kind of what, how, and who. So those are really the three filters there. That's the way it's working. We're still in the process of moving some of the data around, but the information's all on there and all sound. And I would suggest you have a look at it. It's all been redone over the last year so that it now works beautifully on phones, tablets, everything. So it's responsive. So IFA, talking to a client, sitting in someone's house perhaps, if someone says, I'm interested in this, you can, if you want, especially if you're familiar with it anyway, just say, hang on, I can look that up for you. It's all there, it's free to use, no login, no nothing. Just use it as you go along. So what does this boil down to? You have choices. This rather started off as my snog, marry, avoid slide. And I decided, actually, I probably can't put that on the slide just in case I circulate it. But you have got a choice. You can offer it as an option, this kind of area, or you can specialise it, or of course you can ignore it. But really, what are the threats if you ignore it? I wouldn't recommend anyone going down that route, and that group of people is clearly getting smaller and smaller. And by having free-to-use tools, obviously, it's a lot easier for you to engage with it, to move into it, to get active. So most of this is in your questionnaire that I will send around at the end, the feedback questionnaire. But the things I want you to take away from today, firstly, what can or maybe should I do differently after today? What do I need to do to my fact find? What processes need to change? What advice would your interested clients want? What would they want to be talking about? And the third one, I can't go into any huge detail on this, but the regulators are looking at this, and I am talking with them. I've got various meetings lined up. Please tell me what the regulators should do in this area. I've got my ideas, and I have talked to a lot of advisors and portfolio managers over the years, but I could really do with people throwing in their opinions. If you've got something you think is sensible, that's going to help shift this forward, make it acceptable without terrifying people, then that would be good. And then the last point really is, what help do you need? Because I am changing Fund EcoMarket all the time. This is my passion. I will be doing it for a long time. Can't update it every 5 minutes. It all costs money. But if you've got ideas where you said, if that was on there, it'd be really handy, I want to hear it.